known for its psychedelic color schemes and adorable animal designs, Lisa Frank became one of the defining brands and aesthetics of the 90s and early 2000s. While on the surface the brand seemed fun and carefree, behind the scenes, things were not all sunshine and rainbows. Hi, I'm Sasha, and I like to take deep dives into childhood media in order to escape the horrors of adulthood. The Lisa Frank aesthetic has been everywhere lately, at least somewhat in part because of its association with pop star Zara Larsson and her colorful Y2K rebrand. Because of this rainbow resurgence, the brand has been on my mind a lot lately. So today, I'm digging into the history of Lisa Frank, why the brand disappeared, and how it's managed to make a comeback 20 years later. Growing up, my sister and I always called it Liza Frank for some reason.
Illiterate!
So if I slip up and call it that at any point and don't catch it, I apologize. As you'll see in this video, Lisa Frank is no stranger to a lawsuit. So quick disclaimer that this video was created for entertainment purposes, all opinions expressed are my own, and all information presented is factual to the best of my knowledge. Now let's get into it. Lisa Frank Inc. started out in the 70s as a jewelry company called Sticky Fingers. In 1979, Lisa Frank, the company founder, changed the name to Lisa Frank Incorporated, often abbreviated as LFI. Along with this name change was a shift in focus away from jewelry to stickers, which were a big thing in the 80s. When the trend of sticker collecting began to fade, Lisa Frank once again shifted its focus, this time to school supplies. One thing that remained constant through each of these rebrands was that the company had a target audience of young girls. By the 90s, the company landed deals with big-name retailers like Target and Walmart, and this is how the vast majority of people became familiar with Lisa Frank. At the height of its success, Lisa Frank evolved into more of a lifestyle brand, expanding its product range to include things like apparel and stuffed animals. The brand opened up its own flagship stores and even had a newsletter. If I were to describe Lisa Frank in one word, it would be maximalism. The brand is no stranger to animal print, glitter, or bright colors. In fact, the brand name is practically synonymous with rainbows. When the company first started, the artists used an airbrush technique to create their designs, but when digital art became a more accessible tool, they shifted to this new medium while maintaining the airbrush aesthetic. Also, did you know that the Lisa Frank characters have names? The unicorn is named Marky, the aliens are called Zoomer and Zorbit, and most notably, the tiger and leopard cubs are named after Lisa Frank's sons, Hunter and Forrest. So now that we've done this surface level overview, let's get into what was going on behind the scenes. And trust me, it's a lot. In 2024, a 4-part docuseries called Glitter and Greed, the Lisa Frank story, was released on Amazon Prime. This documentary was a major source for this video, but I like being thorough, so it certainly wasn't my only source. The series is well done. It's really entertaining, really informative, and overall a really good watch that I would recommend checking out. That being said, it does have a very clear bias against Lisa Frank the person. The biggest indicator of this for me was the fact that they interview her estranged son Hunter, who has a very unhealthy attachment to his father, Lisa's ex-husband, but they don't interview her son Forrest, who she seems to have a very good relationship with. Frankly, I don't think they needed to involve either of her children, but the decision to only interview her estranged son seems oddly calculated to me. On top of that, Lisa Frank herself wasn't interviewed for this documentary. They did reach out to her, but she only made a generic comment, which was probably expected. To my knowledge, Lisa hasn't done an on-camera interview since the 90s, and it's well known that she rarely does interviews in general. So the filmmakers knew there was like a 99% chance she was going to say no. Based on many accounts, both in this documentary and beyond, Lisa Frank isn't a great person. She has allegedly caused a lot of damage in a lot of people's lives. So I'm definitely not saying she's blameless. I'm just saying this documentary wasn't exactly an objective source of information. The former employees featured in the docuseries start out by initially painting a picture of Lisa and the company that's as fun and colorful as the brand itself. The stories they share make the company sound like it was a casual and fun environment for artists. But it's a slippery slope from being unprofessional in the fun way to unprofessional in the not fun way. Even early on, it sounded like the type of place that would cause psychological damage. Lisa would supposedly give employees the cold shoulder if she wasn't pleased with their work, but would treat them like gold star students when she was happy with them. While it was pretty easy to get away with this buddy-buddy type of work environment when the company was relatively unknown, after the shift to retail stores, this unfortunately, and unsurprisingly, turned into a tale of corporate greed. Employees were making just above minimum wage while the company was bringing in over $66 million a year in profits. One former employee discussed how she needed to go on food stamps in order to support her kids as a single mom. Meanwhile, Lisa Frank was living in a mansion and using a private jet. Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, CEOs and greed. Speaking of CEOs, a little-known fact about LFI is that Lisa Frank was not the CEO for the majority of the company's success in the 90s. It was actually her ex-husband, James Green. James Green joined Lisa Frank Inc. as an artist in 1982. He quickly became Lisa's right-hand man, and in 1992, he was made the president and CEO of the company. While Lisa thrived at sales and understanding what would be commercially successful, James was supposedly the more business-minded one of the duo. It's unclear for exactly how long, but James and Lisa had been secretly dating for several years at this point. And in 1994, the couple got married. The docuseries shows footage from their wedding, and even just from those clips, James comes across as a real jerk. A few years after the wedding, Lisa gave James 49% of the company's shares. So he was given nearly half of the company's shares, but Lisa was smart enough to keep the other 51% for herself, ensuring that she maintained her status as the majority shareholder. For those of you who don't speak corporate, this means that Lisa would still get to have final say in any and all major business decisions. As many married couples do, Lisa and James started having kids. This led to Lisa staying home more frequently to raise their children, leaving James unopposed as the head of the company, to the dismay of most Lisa Frank employees. The whole second episode of the docuseries gets into a bunch of stories that essentially paint the company as one of the worst places to work. It sounded like virtually anything you can picture when it comes to a toxic work environment was present at this company. They were tapping into people's emails and phones, there was high turnover, and people weren't allowed to go home early no matter what the circumstance was. If you worked there, you were expected to make your job your number one priority, despite not being paid a livable wage. In fact, working there was apparently so horrible that several former employees had to sue LFI in order to get their employee benefits and final pay after leaving the company. Every former employee that they interview basically says that James is the reason the company turned into a toxic place to work, claiming that he created an environment where they feared they would be fired at any moment. They share a company newsletter that he wrote, which put a massive emphasis on loyalty, specifically to the boss. It sounded very cult-like. James was also allegedly prone to having angry outbursts that involved screaming and throwing furniture. As I was sitting there listening to all these employee horror stories, I was wondering, how has no one sued this guy? But turns out, they did. In 2005, over a dozen employees and associates of LFI were involved in a lawsuit against James Green, attesting that he created a hostile work environment. As part of this, they submitted sworn affidavits, which is the text I've been showing on screen. Many of the affidavits expressed their support for Lisa Frank to take over the company again instead of James, and mention people quitting specifically because of James. I should note that this lawsuit was issued by Lisa Frank, so take these statements with a grain of salt. The documentary brings in James Green to interview, and he's just as insufferable as you would probably expect. He starts off by giving himself all of the credit for Lisa Frank's success, despite the fact that she started the company without him. He phrases everything like, "I did this, I did that." Never any usage of the words "we" or "the team." No, everything was his doing and his alone. Once the director prompts him, he does finally give credit to Lisa Frank for essentially being a sales executive, but outside of that, he pretty much reduces her to being a figurehead and not much else. While he's more than happy to take credit for all of the company's successes, he's much less eager to take responsibility for any of its mistakes or shortcomings. Yeah, that's not how life works, buddy. Every time the director asks him about one of the many accusations that former employees have made about him, he responds with phrases like, "That's ridiculous," and "Are you stupid?" only to then contradict his own answers. Not a great indicator that someone is telling the truth. You know, there's two sides to every story, but in this case, we're hearing like 10 different sides, and the only person who seems to agree with James's version of events is the former executive vice president, Rhonda Rowlette, who refers to him as a genius. I learned that James made her the vice president of a company he started shortly after leaving LFI, so take from that what you will. Based on employee accounts, Rhonda is also a horrible person. She was known around the company as the Enforcer, a title that she does not seem to be ashamed of. Former employees shared multiple stories about her firing people for reasons that definitely would have resulted in a lawsuit nowadays, all of which she, of course, denies. The affidavits from the 2005 lawsuit really paint a picture of Rhonda doing a lot of scheming, for lack of a better word. This includes the statements of two literal lawyers that claimed James and Rhonda were involved in under-the-table dealings that they instructed people not to tell Lisa about. The most shocking of which was the two of them allegedly conspiring to sell the company without Lisa Frank's knowledge. Understandably, this would lead to Lisa Frank accusing the two of colluding to take over the company. I don't know how they would have achieved that with access to only 49% of the company's stock, but James and Rhonda both claim that Lisa knew about the sale of the company and had been involved in the process up until this lawsuit. In 2005, Lisa and James filed for divorce and, unfortunately, dragged the company into the process. In the lawsuit against James, multiple employees stated that they were forced to pick sides between the two, with Rhonda working as the middle person for James. These poor people were just trying to do their jobs and go home, but instead they had to deal with this because Lisa and James decided to make their divorce everybody's problem. Lisa didn't want anything to do with James anymore, so she removed him from his position at the company and sued to get back the 49% of company shares that she gave him after they got married. James countersued, claiming that since he was the real brains of the operation, he should be the rightful owner of the company. Among the claims in the countersuit was a statement that James created virtually all of the characters and designs used by Lisa Frank Inc. Never mind the fact that there was an entire team of artists and designers that worked for the company. I guess he just paid them to sit there and get yelled at. He also claimed that he built and managed every department that the company had. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that just doing the job of a CEO? Why would that make you entitled to own the company? Unsurprisingly, these arguments and the sweeping generalizations they made did not work out in his favor. James ended up losing the case and his shares in Lisa Frank. Look, I'm obviously not the guy's biggest fan, but even I have to admit that that had to hurt, both emotionally and financially. But my sympathy only extends so far, because when his countersuit failed, James made two separate attempts in 2008 and 2009 to evict Lisa Frank from the company building, claiming that rent was owed to his investment company, which Lisa had an equal amount of shares in. In the 2009 attempt, he dragged their kids into it, who were both literal children at the time, because they also owned shares in the company. Both attempts were unsuccessful. Although Lisa and James would be in and out of court for several years, James had been removed from the company shortly after the couple filed for divorce. So in 2006, Lisa began leading the company by herself for the first time since the 80s. But unfortunately, the working conditions didn't seem to improve much. Employees reported that she had a tendency to micromanage, while simultaneously not seeming to have an actual plan for the company. She would allegedly be very nitpicky about design details without providing any useful feedback. And when artists failed to meet the expectations that they weren't given, she would hurl insults at them. It sounded similar to how things were under James's leadership, but this time with some indecisiveness sprinkled in. Turnover at the company remained high until it got to a point where people started being laid off. There was also a consensus that Lisa Frank didn't want to change or evolve the brand from its initial look. In terms of artistic integrity, I understand that, but from a business standpoint, not a smart move. By the 2010s, the brand had pretty much disappeared, at least in the eyes of the public. But Lisa Frank wouldn't remain in obscurity for too long. In 2016, an indie makeup brand called Glamour Dolls reached out to Lisa Frank for a licensing deal. At first, this seemed like a win-win situation. It would have put a major spotlight on Glamour Dolls, giving them the exposure needed to help stake their claim in the beauty world, and it would have made Lisa Frank relevant in the public eye for the first time in years, with minimal effort on her part. However, the micromanaging that former employees claimed they experienced from Lisa Frank apparently did not just apply to her own business. In the documentary, they interview Glamour Dolls co-founders Peter Georgotas and Jessica Romano, who claimed that Lisa Frank was heavily involved in how she wanted the products to look. She would have them change specific details such as colors and materials to be the way she wanted them, treating the collab as if it were an official Lisa Frank release under the Lisa Frank company. I'm certainly not an expert on licensing deals, but this seemed weird to me because, to my knowledge, the IP owners usually aren't that directly involved in the development process of licensing collabs. If you know more, let me know in the comments, but I believe typically the majority of the work is done by the company producing the product, then they present the finalized ideas to the legal team and maybe the marketing team of the license owner, and if everything looks good, the product goes into production. Like, don't most companies sell licensing rights so that they can make money while putting in as little work as possible? If anyone should know the answer to this, it would be Lisa Frank, who got her big break by selling products that she made using a licensing deal. In addition to some other unprofessional behaviors, Peter and Jessica later discovered, after they'd already locked into a contract with Lisa Frank, that the 15% of profits LFI demanded was a higher amount than what was typical for licensing deals. This was on top of requiring quarterly royalty payments of $25,000, before any products had even been created. To me, it seems like Lisa was more concerned with making her company profitable again than she was with using this opportunity to make the brand relevant again. Glamour Dolls was an up-and-coming brand at the time, but it was ultimately still an indie brand. The goal of this collab was to boost the brand's popularity, but they didn't have the funds they needed to do it at the massive scale that they wanted to. So they decided to create a Kickstarter campaign to raise money for it. The campaign went viral and they got the money they needed, but because of Lisa Frank's alleged continuous refusal to approve anything, the creation of the products kept getting delayed well past the deadlines that their supporters had been given. Peter claimed that while all of this was going on, the original licensing deal expired, so they had to renew it. In this renewal, LFI multiplied the dollar amounts from the initial deal, charging them 5 times as much money, despite the fact that they hadn't even sold any products yet. Because of all of these delays that kept happening, the Kickstarter supporters understandably became angry because they felt like they had been scammed. And as always, people took things way too far and started harassing Jessica online, leading to her eventually leaving the company and filing for bankruptcy. After she left, they finally began getting some products completed, but they never launched because LFI canceled the licensing deal after receiving yet another payment of $125,000. On top of that, they found out that Lisa Frank was supposedly claiming that LFI had nothing to do with the Kickstarter campaign or the delays, even though Peter and Jessica both claim Lisa Frank was with them at the initial meeting with Kickstarter. Now, a pretty significant detail that often gets overlooked is that Glamour Dolls had already secured a 4-product deal with Ipsy because of the licensing deal with Lisa Frank. The Kickstarter campaign was created so that they could make an additional 10 products for the collab. This means that the Kickstarter campaign wasn't necessary for the collab to happen. I think the smart thing to do would have been to make the 4 products that they had the deal for, and if it was successful, then they could have renegotiated the terms of their licensing deal and used the profit from the initial collab to expand the product range, which is something I've seen other companies do. In my opinion, Glamour Dolls put the cart before the horse with this collab. Most licensing deals aren't this messy, but the fact that they signed a major licensing deal without having a lawyer look at it first, combined with their decision to create a Kickstarter campaign instead of doing a smaller product range, shows that they weren't ready to handle something at this large of a scale yet. That being said, I don't think their inexperience and mistakes would have led to such a huge disaster if they hadn't partnered with a company that was seemingly taking advantage of their inexperience. With Glamour Dolls going MIA, this seemed to be the end of things, but the story resurfaced in 2020 when Lisa Frank announced a collab with the makeup brand Morphe. After the dumpster fire that was the Glamour Dolls collab, people were critical of Lisa Frank for doing yet another makeup collab. LFI, of course, wanted this collab to be a success, so when Insider reached out, a representative of Lisa Frank responded, placing all of the blame for the failed collaboration on Glamour Dolls. This would be a mistake. When the Morphe collection dropped, it included an eyeshadow palette with packaging that Glamour Dolls claims was identical to one that they had designed for their collab. Jessica shows the prototype packaging in the documentary, and the resemblance is pretty uncanny. This, combined with the statements made to Insider, led to Glamour Dolls filing a lawsuit against Lisa Frank for breach of contract, defamation, and fraud. Lisa Frank, of course, countersued for breach of contract, denying all of the claims made in the Glamour Dolls lawsuit. Several of the claims were dismissed, but the claims from Glamour Dolls about breach of contract and defamation are still part of an ongoing case. This is actually not the first time that a Lisa Frank licensing deal ended in a lawsuit. In 2010, Lisa Frank signed a licensing deal with a company called CSS Industries. It's really hard to find any information about this collab other than the fact that it ended in 2012 when Lisa Frank sued the company for not earning $2.8 million, which was the amount promised in their licensing agreement. Lisa Frank is very protective of her intellectual property. So much so that she also sued a Canadian craft company called Orb Factory in 2015 for copyright infringement, claiming that the artwork was too similar to Lisa Frank's copyrighted characters. She specifically claimed that this change happened after the company hired her former art director, although the art director in question had no part in the design process for these products. So was Lisa's motivation really about copyright infringement, or was it retaliation against a former employee? Legally, I can't say. I can only speculate. The case settled out of court in 2018 for an undisclosed amount. So if you've been keeping track here, Lisa Frank has almost consistently been involved in some form of a lawsuit for the last 20 years. And I didn't even cover every single one. Nowadays, Lisa Frank seems to be an expert at lucrative licensing deals. But while every collab since the Morphe palette seems to have been smooth sailing, the string of successful deals also had a bit of a rocky start. In 2019, Hotels.com announced a pop-up hotel suite in collaboration with Lisa Frank. The hotel suite was decked out in rainbow colors along with Lisa Frank decor and artwork. But as soon as the pop-up was announced, it was surrounded by yet another scandal, because many astute internet users noticed the major similarities to the home designed by artist Amina Mucciolo. Amina, also known on Instagram and here on YouTube as Tasselfairy, is an artist based in Los Angeles. To my knowledge, Amina now uses they/them pronouns, so that is how I will be referring to them, but some of the older articles I cite used she/her. In 2017, Amina and their partner decided to give their apartment a bright and colorful makeover, turning the space into what they affectionately called Cloudland. The design and its process quickly went viral, giving Amina several opportunities, including brand deals, magazine covers, and even a feature on the Today Show. In 2018, the Lisa Frank Instagram account followed Amina and began what started out as a positive relationship. The account would interact with Amina both publicly and privately, and would even repost Amina's photos on their Facebook page. When we see brands do this, it usually results in a sponsored post or even a collab. So when the Hotels.com pop-up was announced, that's exactly what people thought had happened. People began congratulating Amina for what they had assumed was a project that they had participated in. But that was not the case. Amina had absolutely no involvement in the hotel pop-up, but agreed that it looked similar to Cloudland. Feeling hurt and confused, Amina sent an email to the Lisa Frank company about the situation. Instead of responding, the brand removed the evidence of having ever publicly interacted with them. I just think it's funny how literally 4 years before this, Lisa Frank sued Orb Factory for stealing their artwork, only to then allegedly do the exact same thing to another artist. Like, isn't that interesting? The most shocking part of this ordeal is that the Hotels.com pop-up was happening across the street from where Amina lived. Let me tell you, the gasp I let out when they revealed this was of cinematic proportions. On top of that, it was being hosted in a building owned by the same property owners as Amina's apartment. As if things couldn't get any worse, Amina also received an eviction notice with a deadline that matched up with the start date for the hotel pop-up. In an interview with Uncover LA, Amina admitted to being late on rent payments in the past. While their landlord had previously been accommodating, this time the late rent payments resulted in an eviction notice from the higher-ups. Now, viewing this as an outsider, I think it's highly probable that their building owners won the bid for the Hotels.com pop-up, became aware of Cloudland, and wanted to get rid of it in case it created a conflict of interest. By evicting Amina, they could protect themselves from losing the Hotels.com deal while simultaneously getting rid of a tenant who doesn't always pay rent on time. However, I doubt Lisa Frank had any direct involvement in this part of the issue because she probably wouldn't have had much say in the location of the pop-up. With all of this going on, it obviously wasn't great press for the hotel pop-up. Whenever journalists would reach out to Lisa Frank for a statement, LFI would just redirect them to Hotels.com. And Hotels.com wanted absolutely none of the smoke, so their representatives just released some generic statements saying that the pop-up was solely based on Lisa Frank's artwork and that they had nothing to do with the changes to Amina's living situation. People have asked Amina if they've tried to sue Lisa Frank, and they said they had lawyers look into the situation, but the lawyers basically said that they don't have a case. I wasn't surprised to hear this because I literally just did a whole video about the Mattel vs. MGA lawsuit over who owned the rights to Bratz, which dealt heavily with intellectual property law. Whether Amina had sued Lisa Frank or if Lisa Frank had the audacity to sue Amina, the conclusion most likely would have been the same. Similar to how the Barbie vs. Bratz case turned out, the court probably would have concluded that no one can claim a monopoly on the usage of rainbow decor. Additionally, since Amina hadn't applied for a copyright of Cloudland, they would have had a harder time proving copyright infringement since the hotel pop-up used Lisa Frank artwork. There's a thin line between inspiration and copying, but unfortunately, copyright law isn't always able to determine the distinction between the two, and big companies frequently take advantage of this. At this point, like Taylor Swift, you may be asking, are we out of the woods yet? And the answer is yes, but ahead of us is a forest. Specifically, Lisa Frank's son, Forest Green. Like and subscribe for more great puns. Forest Green, and yes, that is his real name, is largely credited with bringing Lisa Frank into the modern age. This began when he took over the company Instagram account in 2019. I forgot to screenshot it, but one of the sources I read also mentioned that Lisa Frank didn't even have a website at this point, so it's no wonder the company had been struggling. With the continuous rise of Y2K nostalgia, Forest leaned into Lisa Frank as an aesthetic, highlighting its influence in people's daily lives. Now if you used Lisa Frank's art style, instead of getting served a lawsuit, you could be featured on their page. He also created Instagram filters and highlighted celebrity interactions with the brand. Under his guidance, Lisa Frank rapidly grew its social media following. Shortly after this success, Forest became LFI's Director of Business Development. According to LinkedIn, he's also now the president of Lisa Frank Inc. He was only 21 when he was made the Director of Business Development, but he's seemingly been groomed to take over the company. In a 2021 interview with Bustle, Forrest said he's basically been working at the company since he was a kid. He shared some stories that definitely had me questioning if child labor laws were being violated, but he didn't seem to be bothered by them, so that's what matters. I think it's only a matter of time before Forrest takes over the role of CEO from his mom. Aside from the fact that he's clearly doing a good job, Lisa Frank has never sold any shares in the company, so it makes sense that she'd want it to go to someone she trusts, who will most likely maintain its status as a privately owned business. Since Forrest became the Director of Business Development, Lisa Frank has done several successful collabs with brands like Loungefly, Crocs, Casetify, and even Pillsbury. And to my knowledge, none of these have ended in lawsuits. With the brand's popularity back on the rise, it was in the perfect position to take advantage of a viral moment that was on the horizon. In 2024, the Rainbow Dolphin meme was born. The meme involved putting text of something slightly unhinged or even depressing, like, "I don't remember the last time I was truly happy," over a background consisting of smiling dolphins and rainbows. The image would then be paired with the 2017 song Symphony by Zara Larsson and Clean Bandit. Simple, fun, and easy to create. The perfect recipe for a viral meme. Zara leaned heavily into this viral moment, using a dolphin background at concerts when she performed the song. By her own admission, Zara didn't have much of an aesthetic before this. Now, she's known for her bright, colorful, and bedazzled looks. The timing of this viral moment was very much on Zara Larsson's side, as it happened when she was on tour with Tate McRae and gearing up to release a new album. Zara's new aesthetic of beachy Y2K rainbow maximalism was carried over to the Midnight Sun music video, album, and tour. As a result, the last year has really felt like it's Zara Larsson's world and we're all just living in it. This was actually what inspired me to do this video, because while I've seen plenty of discussion about how the dolphin meme led to Zara Larsson's successful rebrand, I haven't seen many people discuss how it was just as beneficial for Lisa Frank. While the artwork from the original dolphin meme was actually created by a talented artist named Christian Reese-Lassen, people quickly began associating the rainbows and dolphins with the similar aesthetic of Lisa Frank. Noticing an opportunity, LFI, presumably under the guidance of Forrest, partnered with Zara Larsson to release a special cover for the Midnight Sun album. This helped cement Zara Larsson's new branding and created a direct association with it for Lisa Frank. Zara began her Midnight Sun tour in October 2025. With her newly defined aesthetic, fans of course wanted to get concert gear to match the Midnight Sun vibes. And what better way to do that than with some accessories from the Rainbow Queen that just designed her album cover? Near the end of 2025, Lisa Frank announced collaborations with accessory companies Stony Clover Lane and Kitsch.
Coincidence? I think not!
In an interview with Birdie, the CEO of Kitsch even mentioned how beneficial Zara Larsson's new aesthetic is for the timing of their collab. Beyond the Midnight Sun tour, the Y2K look continues to influence current fashion trends, as society finally moves away from its long-standing love affair with minimalism. Based on how things have gone in recent years, it's reasonable to assume that more Lisa Frank collabs will be on the horizon, especially with the increasing popularity of maximalism. In a 2015 interview with Great Big Story, Lisa Frank said that the company plans to continue doing licensing deals and doesn't have any desire to return to manufacturing. However, that may have changed, because they've started selling stickers again on the Lisa Frank website. And with that, our look into the very messy history of Lisa Frank comes to an end. When I chose this video topic, I thought I was going to discuss the rise of minimalism and how it contributed to the decline of Lisa Frank's popularity. And while I have no doubt that that was a contributing factor, all of the other things I uncovered seemed to play a much bigger role. As soon as I started my research, I knew some shenanigans were afoot, because the Wikipedia page for Lisa Frank is so bare bones. It's like a third of the size of the Neopets Wikipedia page and half the size of the Bratzilla's page. Neopets has been around since 1999, and Bratzilla's was a doll line that only lasted for 2 years. So how does a company with over 40 years of history have less information than both of those? What was especially suspicious was how short the criticisms and controversies section was. It doesn't even mention the incidents with Glamour dolls or Tasselfairy, despite mentioning the documentary that they were both featured in. It also doesn't mention any of the lawsuits I went over aside from the 2005 suit against James Green. I'm not sure if the page has only been updated by fans of Lisa Frank or if they've just gotten really lucky, but it feels like most of this stuff has been swept under the rug over the years. For example, the only sources I could find that covered the lawsuit with Orb Factory were local news outlets in Tucson, Arizona, where Lisa Frank is based. Lisa Frank apparently has a pretty infamous reputation in Tucson, especially for being a horrible place to work, so it's wild that so much of this information hasn't really escaped the Tucson bubble. Aside from the Zara Larsson part of the story, I genuinely didn't know anything that I discussed in this video before I started my research, so I'm really curious to hear what you guys think and if you knew about any of this. Does this change the way you view Lisa Frank, or are you going to try to separate the art from the artist? Were you a fan of Lisa Frank growing up? Have you seen the Lisa Frank documentary? Let me know! I'm hoping my next video will be a bit more lighthearted because I need a detox after all of this. If you liked this video, go ahead and subscribe for more nostalgic deep dives, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.